His lawyer leaned in and whispered something I could not hear. I only saw the effect. My husband's smile froze, like a picture paused mid-laugh. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. His fingers tightened around the pen, then loosened, then tightened again. For a brief moment, the room forgot I existed. That was fine. I had waited a long time for people to forget to watch me, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me pull you back, because what happened in that office only makes sense if you understand how calmly I walked into it, and why everyone else thought I had lost my mind long before a single paper was signed. My name is Elowen Harrow. It is not a name people forget easily, though for most of my marriage, forgetting me came naturally. I was married to Daniel for almost 2 decades, long enough to build a life that looked solid from the outside and hollow from every place that mattered. Long enough for sacrifice to feel like oxygen, invisible and assumed. Long enough for him to believe that what I gave was infinite. When Daniel told me he wanted a divorce, he did not raise his voice. He did not cry. He did not even look nervous. He sat across from me at the dining table we picked out together years earlier and spoke as if he were reading a grocery list. He wanted the house, the business, the accounts, the investments. He said it was cleaner that way. He said he deserved it. He said I would be fine. I nodded. That was the first moment people decided I was broken. My sister stared at me like I had spoken another language. My friends pulled me aside and whispered urgent advice, names of aggressive lawyers, stories about women who fought harder and won. My mother cried and asked what had happened to me. Daniel mistook my silence for defeat. Everyone else mistook it for shock. I did not argue a single term. I did not ask for revisions. I did not demand explanations. I did not remind him of the years I spent supporting what he built, or the parts of myself that disappeared so his ambitions could breathe. I simply listened, nodded, and said yes. Yes to the house. Yes to the business. Yes to everything. The room always went quiet after that. People do not know what to do with a woman who does not beg. They waited for me to crack, for anger, hysteria, threats, something that fit the shape of the story they expected. Instead, I remained composed, calm, cooperative, almost serene. It made them uncomfortable. It made Daniel confident. He shook hands with his lawyer like a man congratulating himself. He told friends I had accepted reality. He told his parents I was being reasonable for once. He told himself I had finally understood my place in the narrative of his success. What he never asked was why. Why a woman who had given up her career, her financial independence, and her name would surrender so easily. Why I read every document without interruption. Why I signed where they told me to sign, never hesitating, never asking for more time. There is a particular kind of arrogance that comes from being certain you have already won. It makes people careless. It makes them generous with assumptions. It makes them believe that compliance equals ignorance. I let them believe that. Every call from a concerned relative ended the same way. Are you sure you understand what you are giving up? Every well-meaning warning carried the same undertone. You will regret this. Every conversation ended with someone offering to help me fight. I thanked them. Then I did nothing. Daniel started moving through the world like a man unburdened. He made plans. He spoke about the future as if I were already erased. He told people the divorce was amicable. He told them I wanted it over quickly. He never once wondered why speed mattered to me. By the time we sat in that office, with documents neatly stacked and his lawyer confident, everyone thought the story was finished. A woman abandoned, a man victorious, assets transferred, hands shaken. Then his lawyer leaned in and whispered, and everything changed. I watched Daniel's face closely, the way you watch a storm form on the horizon. I did not react. I did not speak. I simply waited, exactly as I had been doing for a very long time. Some people think patience is passive. They confuse silence with surrender. They are usually the ones who never see it coming. People like to imagine disappearance as something sudden, a door slamming, a suitcase packed in the night. But that is not how it happened to me. I did not vanish all at once. I thinned, slowly, carefully, over years, until there was barely enough of me left for anyone to notice I was gone. In the beginning, I was everywhere in Daniel's life. I managed schedules, smoothed conflicts, remembered names, birthdays, deadlines. I learned the rhythms of his moods the way some people learn languages. When he was anxious, I made things quieter. When he was confident, I made things easier. When he dreamed out loud, I turned those dreams into lists and plans and phone calls. None of it had a title. None of it had a paycheck. It was simply expected, and because I loved him, I gave it. His career grew in clean, visible ways. Promotions, recognition, invitations. Mine receded in places no one could point to. I stopped being asked what I wanted and started being informed of decisions already made. "We are moving," he would say. "This is better for us." "We are investing," he would say. "Trust me." Somewhere along the way, trust became shorthand for silence. I told myself it was temporary, that once he was stable, once things settled, once we had more time, I would step back into myself. That promise became elastic. It stretched to accommodate every new demand until it no longer held any shape at all. The first thing to go was my name in conversations. I became Daniel's wife. Then I became just his support. Then I became invisible, even in rooms I stood inside. At dinners, people asked him questions about his work and nodded politely when I spoke, already looking past me for someone more relevant. He did not notice, or if he did not correct it. Respect does not disappear loudly. It fades in small permissions, interrupting me mid-sentence, making jokes at my expense and calling it teasing, forgetting things that mattered to me and expecting forgiveness because he was busy. Busy became the justification for everything. I learned not to complain. I learned to make myself low maintenance. I learned that being agreeable kept the peace. By the time I realized I was no longer consulted about decisions that affected my own life, it felt too late to protest. The pattern was set. I adapted the way people do when resistance costs more than compliance. I adjusted my expectations downward and told myself that maturity meant acceptance. The humiliation was not explosive. There were no dramatic betrayals at first, no shouting matches or slammed doors. It was structural. I was edged out of meetings I once attended, introduced to people as an afterthought, left behind while plans were made around me. When I questioned it, Daniel reassured me with the same calm authority he later used during the divorce. "You are overthinking. This is just how things are now." Looking back, I can see the moments he began preparing for life without me. New advisors who did not know my name. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. A careful separation of finances explained as efficiency. He did not leave suddenly. He reorganized his world so my absence would barely register. I watched all of this without spectacle. I did not cry in front of him. I did not demand apologies. I observed. I learned. I noted what happened when I complied and what happened when I questioned. Compliance made me invisible. Questioning made me inconvenient, so I became invisible on purpose. That is what people misunderstand about obedience. They think it means you have surrendered. In truth, it can mean you are studying the terrain. Every quiet yes taught me where the lines were drawn. Every exclusion showed me where power flowed. Every overlooked contribution clarified what he assumed I would always provide without acknowledgement. When the divorce papers arrived years later, my calm did not come from shock. It came from familiarity. I had already practiced disappearing. I had already learned how to survive inside the margins of someone else's life. By the time Daniel decided I was no longer necessary, I had already learned how to exist without being seen, and disappearing, I would come to understand, is not the same as being gone. Sometimes it is how you prepare to return on your own terms. I learned the truth on a night that looked exactly like every other night of our supposed success. Daniel was out late again, something about a client dinner that mattered too much to miss. I was at home, doing the quiet work that never made it into stories he told. Paying bills, sorting mail, closing loops he did not even know were open. It was ordinary enough that I almost missed it. Almost. There was a discrepancy at first, a number that did not line up, a transfer that did not belong to any account I recognized. I told myself it was nothing, a timing issue, a misfiled expense. I had been trained over the years to explain away my own unease, but curiosity, once awakened, does not easily go back to sleep. I followed the trail, carefully, methodically, the way I did everything else. What I found was not dramatic. It was worse. It was systematic. Daniel was not building what he said he was building. He was borrowing against it, again and again. Mortgages layered on top of mortgages. Credit stretched thin and then thinner. Obligations hidden behind optimism and polished language. The life we displayed was supported by scaffolding no one could see, least of all the people applauding him. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, papers spread in front of me, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet certainty settling in my chest. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a temporary imbalance. This was a pattern, and it was unsustainable. My first instinct was to confront him, to demand answers, to insist we fix it together. That instinct lasted exactly as long as it took me to imagine his response. Daniel did not respond well to questions that threatened his self-image. He would explain, deflect, reframe. He would tell me I was worrying unnecessarily, that I did not see the full picture, that my lack of faith was the real problem. And if he knew I knew, he would close ranks. He would lock doors I still needed open. So I stayed quiet. Silence was not denial. It was strategy. I watched more closely. I kept copies. I learned which documents mattered and which were decoration. I separated what could be separated. I made sure what was mine remained unmistakably mine. All the while, I played the role he expected, supportive, trusting, uninformed. It was lonely in a way I had not experienced before, knowing something that could change everything and having no one to share it with. Sitting across from him at dinners, listening to him talk about growth and expansion while knowing how fragile it all was. Watching him grow more confident as the foundation weakened beneath him. Arrogance thrives in applause. The more people praised him, the more reckless he became. New risks, bigger gestures, grand plans announced before they were viable. He mistook momentum for stability. He mistook my silence for ignorance. The hardest part was not the fear, it was the waiting. Living inside a truth that could not yet be used. Smiling at friends who congratulated us. Nodding along when he spoke about the future we were supposedly building together. Every day required restraint. Every day required me to protect him from himself, even as I quietly prepared for the moment I would stop. When Daniel finally decided he was done with me, I felt something close to relief. Not because I wanted the marriage to end, but because the waiting was over. He asked for everything with the confidence of a man who believed assets were the same as value. He did not understand that what he was claiming came with weight he had never bothered to measure. I did not correct him. That was the moment I stopped protecting him. I agreed to his terms not because I had nothing left to fight with, but because I finally saw the cleanest way to let the truth speak for itself. All I had to do was step aside and allow him to take exactly what he believed he deserved. Some lessons cannot be taught. They have to be claimed. By the time the divorce process officially began, I had already learned the most important skill it would require: restraint. Not the kind that looks like dignity from the outside, but the kind that feels like holding your breath underwater while everyone else assumes you are floating. I entered mediation the way I entered the marriage years before, prepared to listen more than I spoke and to let other people underestimate what my silence meant. The first meeting took place in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and toner. Daniel sat across from me with an ease that would have been insulting if it had not been so predictable. He spoke confidently, laid out his expectations, and framed every demand as practical. His lawyer nodded along, pen tapping just a little too fast against his legal pad. I noticed that. I noticed everything. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice soft. I said I wanted this to be simple. I said I did not want conflict. I said I trusted Daniel to be fair. Each sentence landed exactly as intended. His shoulders relaxed. His lawyer frowned. I asked for very little at first. Personal items. A modest sum to get started. Shared custody without complications. Nothing about the house. Nothing about the business. Nothing about the accounts that had taken years of my life to support. The mediator looked between us, uncertain. Daniel smiled like a man being handed a gift he did not have to unwrap. Friends were horrified when they heard. They called late at night, voices tight with urgency, telling me I was being taken advantage of. My sister begged me to slow down, to rethink, to demand more. Even my mother asked if I was afraid. I told them all the same thing. I was tired. I wanted peace. I wanted it over. What I did not tell them was that peace and surrender are often confused by people who have never needed patience as a weapon. With each meeting, I asked for less. I clarified that I did not want to revisit earlier discussions. I signed preliminary agreements quickly. I waived reviews that would have been expected. Daniel grew bolder with every concession. He talked openly about plans for the house, about restructuring the business without me, about how relieved he was that I was not making things difficult. Difficulty would have slowed him down. His lawyer tried, quietly, to introduce caution. He asked about valuations. He suggested additional reviews. He mentioned liabilities in careful, professional tones. Daniel waved it away every time. He told him it was unnecessary. He told him I was not contesting anything. He told him he knew what he was doing. Confidence can be intoxicating, especially when it is mistaken for competence. I watched Daniel make decisions faster and faster, eager to finalize, eager to move on. He signed documents without reading them closely. He dismissed delays as annoyances. He grew impatient with anything that threatened to slow the finish line he believed he could already see. Meanwhile, the paperwork grew thicker, attachments multiplied, addendums were added and acknowledged, pages that required initials stacked up quietly, doing their work without drama. Every signature tightened the structure around him. Every agreement reinforced the outcome he had chosen. At night, alone, I felt the weight of what I was allowing to happen. Not guilt, clarity. There were moments when the simplicity of speaking up tempted me, when ending it all early would have been easier, but easy would have protected him. Easy would have spared him the full understanding of his own choices. So I stayed the course. Daniel began telling people he had won. Not in those words, but close enough. He spoke about generosity, about how I was being realistic, about how smoothly everything was going. His certainty hardened into arrogance. He stopped listening to advice. He stopped checking details. He started counting what he believed was already his. The final hearing was scheduled on a Thursday morning. A formality, everyone said. A rubber stamp. Daniel texted me the night before, thanking me for being reasonable. I read the message once, then put my phone down. I was calm in a way that surprised even me. The next day, he would walk into a courtroom, convinced he had taken everything, and I would sit across from him knowing that letting him win had been the most deliberate decision I had made in years. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in tone. Everything echoed, shoes on tile, papers shifting, the quiet authority of a space where decisions become permanent. Daniel arrived confident, shoulders back, tie perfectly straight, wearing the expression of a man who believed the worst part was already behind him. He nodded to his lawyer, glanced at me with something like relief, and took his seat as if settling into a well-earned conclusion. I sat across from him, hands folded, breathing steady. This was not nerves, it was recognition. The moment had finally caught up to what I had known for years. The judge reviewed the case with professional efficiency. Names, dates, agreements. The words dissolved into background noise as the final documents were distributed. Page after page slid across polished wood, each one heavier than the last. Daniel signed eagerly, barely pausing, his pen moving fast, decisive. When it was my turn, I signed slowly, deliberately, aware of the weight of each stroke. His lawyer was the first to notice. I saw it in the pause, the subtle stiffening of his posture, the way his eyes moved back to a page he had already passed. He flipped it forward, then back again, scanning lines that suddenly demanded attention. Daniel leaned over, irritated. "What is it?" he whispered, impatience sharp in his voice. His lawyer did not answer right away. He read again, then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. I watched the effect ripple through Daniel's body. The confidence faltered. The color drained from his face. His hand tightened around the pen until his knuckles whitened. He looked up at me then. Really looked, searching for confusion or panic or denial. He found none. The judge cleared her throat, attention drawn to the disruption. The lawyer spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it might explode. He explained in plain language what the document stated, that the assets Daniel had claimed were tied directly to their obligations, that ownership meant responsibility, that the house carried layered debt, that the business was leveraged beyond its shine, that by insisting on everything, Daniel had also assumed everything. Silence filled the room, thick and absolute. Daniel shook his head, once, then again, faster this time. He said there had to be a mistake. He said this was not what he agreed to. He said he did not understand. His voice rose with each sentence, disbelief tipping into panic. The judge listened patiently, then responded with the kind of calm that ends arguments rather than fuels them. She reminded him that he had been advised, that he had declined further review, that the disclosures were attached, signed, acknowledged. That ignorance was not a defense when opportunity had been offered and refused. Her gavel hovered, then struck, the sound sharp and final. The agreement stood. Daniel slumped back in his chair as if something inside him had given way. The man who walked in expecting victory stared down at papers that now read like a sentence. He did not look at me again. There was nothing left to say. I gathered my things and stood. For a moment, I felt the weight of years pressing against my back, the echo of who I had been and what I had carried. Then I walked out, step by step, into a future that belonged to me alone. The collapse was quiet at first. Calls went unanswered, plans dissolved. The confidence that had once filled rooms evaporated under scrutiny. I rebuilt slowly, a smaller place, simpler days. Decisions made without apology. Dignity returned not as a dramatic revelation, but as a steady presence I could finally feel again. Time passed, enough to see patterns settle, enough to know the ending would not change. Betrayal often wears the same face. So does arrogance. And patience, when paired with clarity, is not passive, it is decisive. This was my story, but it is not unique. It is one version of a lesson people learn too late when certainty outruns understanding. There are many more.